Okay, Shabbat Shalom. And welcome back, which you should be saying welcome back to me. Wasn't feeling too well last week. So just took a little hard break to just remove myself from everything. The quarantine days seemed like a good time to just take a break from everything. And so I did. And I think I might start doing that more often. And I do feel a lot better today. So thank you for your prayers. What I wanted to do today is something that's not on the program. I don't know that we have a program, but we have been doing a series called Footsteps of Messiah. And, we've sometimes a lot of the teaching in from our weekly classes into the live stream on Shabbat. Sometimes I'll do something particular to the Torah portion for that week. Today, I would like to just share something that was on my heart yesterday. And so I just sat down at the dining table and started making some notes. And where it came from, actually, was reading a Torah portion last Sunday and looking at the unique wording of that particular Torah portion, and reference the commentary to that particular verse or that sentence. It was just one sentence, really. And when I saw the commentary on it, and I realized, I'm not the only one that noticed the wording is strange here, and how that was applied. That's just started all sorts of bells and whistles and levers and knobs and buttons and things going off in my head. And so I just sat down yesterday and made some notes about it. And so that's what I want to share with you today. Not real heavy. I don't think it's real heavy. It might be real heavy. I don't know. But I just called it half-life. And so that's what we'll do. We'll just call it half-life. And the reason I want to call it half-life is that today I want to look at how the commandments affect us as individuals. When we read a commandment, often we're going to have different reactions to that commandment based on where we are in our lives. It might be, how have we developed, as a human being? The way you look at a commandment when you're 6 years old might be much different than the way that you look at the commandment when you're 60 years old. The way that you look at that commandment when you know you're actively breaking it might be different than the way you look at the commandment when you know you're not breaking that one. So there's all sorts of perspectives that will factor into how we read a commandment. And what I noticed as I was reading this particular passage in Exodus last Sunday is that the experience at Mount Sinai, as it's described in the book of Exodus, is that there's a lot of twos that keep popping up in the account. And I just jotted down a few of them. You can probably go back into the experience at Mount Sinai and find more than just the ones I jotted down. But in the experience of Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah and so forth, I noticed that there were 2 tablets. There are even 2 sets of 2 tablets. They had 2 kinds of affirmations to the commandments when they heard them. Some was I'm thinking of something else now, but the 2 affirmations specifically we will do and we will hear. We will do and we will hear. Just a way of saying we will obey them. But they said, yes, we will obey in 2 affirmations. We will do, we will hear. There were 2 kinds of commandments. There were positive commandments, you will do this, and there were negative commandments, you won't do this. The waiting period, if you'll remember, there was, he said, immerse yourselves, wash your clothes, and be ready for the third day. And so there's a little bit of vagueness in the text as to whether it was a 2 or 3 day waiting period. And I think the answer, as we're looking at how the days are calculated, the answer is going to be yes. Was it 2 days? Yes. Was it 3 days? Yes. But by asking that there be a 3 day waiting period or a 3 day preparation period to be ready on the third day, what that does, there's a subtext there that ensures that both the men and the women are able to stand there before the presence and receive the commandments. Women require a little bit of extra time without getting too graphic. We don't want to get too specific with it. At least not in mixed company, but that 3 day waiting period, it ensured that, after the immersion, that women could also be present and stand on equal footing in terms of affirming the commandments. So we have 2 genders. So therefore we have both male and female witnesses. We have the fire and the water on the mountain. It was dripping, it says, but there was also smoke and fire. We had 2 types of tellings. We had the 10 words that were told in the hearing of Israel, all the witnesses. And then we had Moses going up the mountain to get clarification on those 10 words. And we might say he got 603 more as clarifications of the 10 for a total of 613. So there's all sorts of twos that keep appearing. It's like it gives you 2 different perspectives, just like the 2 tellings. You get the short story in the 10 Commandments, and then you get the long story through Moses. You get the male perspective from the male witnesses. You get the female perspective from the female witnesses. You get the fire and the water. You have the positive and the negative commandments. You have the we will do and we will hear. Obedience does have to start with hearing, but then you have to do it. And so obedience doesn't start with the doing. Obedience starts with the hearing. So there's 2 perspectives on what it means to obey. So you even have 2 different ways that the tablets are written. Remember, Adonai himself wrote with his finger on what is thought to be sapphire tablets that were given to Moses the first time. But then the second time he gave it to Moses, but it was written through Moses' hand, is what it says. So there's a direct writing and inscribing, and then it's through Moses. It's through the hand of a human being. So there's all sorts of different twos to pay attention to. And we know with the 2 tellings, just like we have the 10 Commandments, and then we have the rest of them. We have 603 more given to Moses on the mountain. We still know that all of those 613 commandments that were given at the 2 tellings, that they all hang on really just 2. That's what Yeshua said. He says you have to love Adonai and you have to love people. And all the commandments are going to hang on that. So we could kind of look at it as a progression there. We've got 2 commandments, 2 of the greatest, to love Adonai, to love people. And then we've got 10 words that will hang on those 2. And then we have the clarifications of these, the rest of them, to fulfill the number 613, that are going to hang on those 10 that are hanging on the 2. So really it all hangs on 2. Even in the clarifications, even if you look at the commandments themselves, the content of the commandments themselves, loving Adonai and loving his people can be expressed in the very same commandment. For instance, if you're commanded to bring in the first fruits and the tithes, then you're loving Adonai because you're obeying him, you're doing what he told you to do, but you're also loving the priest, the Levites, the stranger, the alien, the orphan, the widow, all those to whom this would be distributed. And so, yes, when you keep a commandment, you're fulfilling those two requirements of the scripture. You're expressing love to Adonai and you're expressing love to people. Leaving a field, the corners of a field to the poor. You do that because you love Adonai and keep his commandments, just like Yeshua said, if you love me, keep my commandments. But it ministers directly to the human beings who are going to come and access the corners of your field, what you have left for the poor to have. And so there's two kinds of commandments that are necessary. And I thought of a toddler in the terrible twos. And if you think of that stage of development, I don't know how long they've been called the terrible twos, but probably for thousands of years. But we know by the age of 2, they're walking and they're beginning to talk. And so they can say things, they can draw things, they can reach things, they can throw things, they can touch things. And we know they're going to start asking why 1,000 times per day. And they won't even slow down. They'll hit the age of 3 and it'll still be why. No matter what answer you give, there will be a why on the end of it. They're not asking why necessarily because they understand your answer. Often the answer is really beyond their brain development. They can't comprehend the answer to why. So they keep asking. Of course, they're going to keep asking. If they don't understand it, they're going to keep asking why. Maybe eventually you'll drop some information that they can understand. So it's not that you're not answering. It's just that it's beyond their development at that age. And I think often we do the same with the Father in heaven. We keep asking why. We read the Torah, and when we get done reading the Torah portion, we have more whys than we started with. We're why. And you know what? He gives us answers to why, but we're just not catching some of it because it's beyond our development in the Word at that spiritual age. And so in the same way, those little terrible twos, they're going to keep asking why, whether you answer them or not. And often they're just playing with the language. They learn certain words. They learn that certain words get a reaction. Certain words have power. And why is one of those go-to words. It definitely, because when you ask why, you get a reaction out of someone. You get a response. And if you need attention at that point or entertainment, then of course you're going to ask why. Now, some words are also powerful, like no. Once they grab onto no, they sense the power of that word because they can sense it when the no is being directed at them. And they think, hey, I'll try this word out. There's a lot of power in this word. When you say no, people listen. And so they'll go through phases where they'll start telling everybody no. And they'll even do things they know they're not supposed to do. And they'll tell themselves, no. Well, I've got news for us. We are all children of Elohim, and we have our terrible twos. We do. We go through the terrible twos. In fact, sometimes I'm not really joking when I tell people this. I say, look, if you're new to the Torah and you've been studying for 3 years, you'll never know more than you knew when you had studied the Torah for 3 years. It's like about the age of 3, we think we know everything that's in the Torah and we have the answers and the solutions to all problems. And then once we grow past that point, we realize we don't know anything about the Torah. That every time we pick it up, we learn something that tells us how much we don't know. Um, so it's the same with the Father in heaven. We're his children. He knows we're going to go through our terrible twos. We're going to start asking why. We're not necessarily going to like the no-nos. It's the same thing. But here's the great thing about it. In Hebrew, a word is its own opposite. It's called a contronym. For an example, in English, the easiest contronym, I think, to explain to people what that means is the English word cleave. Cleave can mean to cut something in two, but it can also mean to hold it close. So cleave is at the same time something that separates and something that unites. Hebrew words are like that. It's just going to depend upon your relationship to that word. Are you in obedience? Are you in disobedience? It will determine many times what your relationship is with that particular Hebrew word. So the Hebrew word I'm talking about is norah. Norah. In modern Hebrew, if you say lo norah, it means it's not terrible. Okay, so norah means terrible in Hebrew. And so if it's not that terrible, we say, no, it's not that bad. Right? Did you go get a shot today? No, it wasn't that bad. Of course, on the other hand, it may have been pretty terrible. So it was norah. But it's a contronym. So it doesn't just mean awful and terrible. It means awesome. Like, wow, that was awesome. So think about moving beyond love Adonai and love people. These are the basics. And these really, it's like, if you think of loving Adonai and loving people, just saying those words, it's not measurable. If I love Adonai, how are you going to measure that? Is it in centimeters? Is it in liters? Is it in inches? Is it in tons? Well, love doesn't have that sort of measurement. If I say love people, how much do I love them? Do I, give $1 at the office for somebody who's on extended leave? Or do I dedicate, 20% of my salary for a year to a particular charity? Do I measure it in dollars? Not necessarily. You can't really measure it with dollars. You can't measure it with time so much. Because often what we give in dollars or what we give in time, maybe it's self-serving. Maybe we want people to notice that we're doing good things for people. So the love, it's hard to get your arms around. It's hard to get your mind around, because in the end, that love equation can only be calculated by Adonai. He knows how much love we have for him. He knows how much love we have for people. And because it's so vague, when we're introducing it to these very young children, as they're just beginning to, begin to use the language, how do we introduce a concept like loving the Father and loving his people? Well, we start teaching them simple prayers. We teach them about thankfulness. We teach them how to say maybe grace before meals or grace after meals. We teach them bedtime prayers. We might teach them other blessings. And in that way, there's something concrete we can do that will help them begin to internalize what love for the Father is, acknowledging, first of all, that he's the creator and he's there to be prayed to, number one. Then we can start working on the details of what it means to love Adonai. Sometimes, as we think about how do we teach them to love people? Well, again, how do you measure that? And because love is such a vague thing at that age, and typically, even as we learn more about love, we associate it with a feeling. Not always a feeling. Sometimes it's a decision. It's an action. So there's a vagueness there. that's difficult to measure. So, with that 2-year-old, we might say very vague things that somehow kids seem to know. When mom says play nice, they kind of seem to know what she's talking about. Share, be sure and share. That may be a harder one for them to be able to obey, not necessarily understand. I think they understand exactly what it means. It's just a harder one to obey. Play nice. It's very vague, right? So we have to move beyond just love Adonai and love his people. Now we have to approach these 10 words on the mountain. And we know that as we approach these 10 words and we try to make them more concrete in our lives, eventually we won't end up doing 613 commandments, because there's a minimal number that could apply to any given individual, because there's priest commandments, there's Levite commandments, there's father commandments, there's mother commandments, there's husband commandments, there's wife commandments, there's merchant commandments, there's farmer commandments. A very small number will actually apply to any individual. That's why it takes a nation to do 613. But out of those 10 words, there will be a certain collection of commandments that also extend to us. But when we go back to the mountain and we look at the reaction of the Israelites at the foot of the mountain, they're only hearing 10. In fact, they only heard a couple there at the beginning, and they went to Moses and said, Moses, look, you go talk to him, and then you come back and tell us what he said, okay? If we hear any more, we will die. That's pretty profound. If we hear 10 whole words, if we hear 10 whole commandments, we'll die. So just imagine, why did it take 40 years in the wilderness? Well, maybe that's how long it took them to get through the 613 without dying. I don't know. But their reaction to it is what's not amusing, but it's profound. That just 10 commandments was terrible to hear. Or was it awesome to hear? It was Norah. Was it terrible or was it awesome? Well, to some of them, apparently it was very terrible. They thought it would kill them. To Moses, clearly it's awesome. But there were two kinds of commandments that they were listening to. There were positive commandments. You will. There were negative commandments. You don't. Don't do this. No. There's yeses and there's nos. It reminds me of Will Carr's son a few years back at Sukkot. And he went up to Alan and he said, you just have to remember this one thing. Mama's head is full of yeses and daddy's head is full of nos. So maybe that's why we needed both the males and the females standing at the mountain. It's two different perspectives of the commandments. Sometimes we like the yeses, and sometimes, we like the nos. It just kind of depends on the person, I guess. But if you think about it, play nice and say grace really do develop into a lot of no-nos for a 2-year-old. Loving Adonai and loving his people also develops into a lot of no-nos for adults. And that word no is powerful. I mean, I know you've heard 2- and 3-year-olds. I mean, they've got gusto when they're saying like, no, 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 no. They can get that down and actually do better than mom and dad sometimes with their no-nos. It's a powerful word and they know it's going to get attention. But it's necessary in the development of the child for them to not just understand what no is. Yes, they're playing with language at first, trying to figure out what it is. And then they're going to understand, well, when they say no, I need to stop whatever it is I'm doing, because clearly what I'm doing is bringing on this no, and they're not kidding. So, But eventually, we need that child to trust us when we say no, no. We don't need to say no, no 20 times like I do to the bulldogs. They know they've probably got a good 10, 15 times they can get away with it, probably before there's a consequence. Children are a little more important. Children are human beings with the spirit of Elohim in them. And when we say no to a child, what we want to do is train them that when we say no, they stop. Because it won't be long when that little hand is going to reach up to the stove, and you don't need to say no, no 15 times before the hand stops. You need, when they hear no the first time, they need to freeze so that you're not in the emergency room with third-degree burns. If they start chasing their ball into the street without looking, which even grown-ups do that sometimes, when we say no, we need them to immediately stop so that they don't get run over. When we see them pulling the dog's ears, we need to say no, and it needs to stop immediately because we don't want them to be bitten by a dog who doesn't want his ears pulled. There's so many things in life where when we hear no, we need to stop immediately. Stop now. Look around. And if the no was unnecessary, we can resume what we were doing. But if it was necessary, it might have saved our life. And that's what we see in the commandments. These are the tree of life. These are the words of life. And so, yes, much of life is, yes, do this, do this. But much of life is, no, don't do that. That turn of phrase that sparked all this for me is found in Exodus 20, verse 1. And it just starts, I'm not even looking at the whole commandment. I'm just looking at the beginning. And it says, God spoke all these words to say. That's odd wording. God spoke, devar, all these words to say, le'emor. So does that double up? Like he spoke them and said them? Well, no, that's unnecessary. So the sages looked at this turn of phrase and looked at the context and, other places where it's been used. And what they understand of this particular phrase is that it has a two-pronged approach. That this is actually a conversation. It's not just, Adonai spoke these words, that the Israelites are actually speaking back to him. He's evoking from them a verbal response. Most of us learn the commandments passively. We're reading our Bibles and we read the commandments and we think about it, we contemplate it. Maybe we'll read a commentary like this commentary on Rashi to Exodus 20, verse 1. But this is a very passive way of learning. But in this way of learning, if we understand what's happening, the father's having a conversation with the child. And he's asking the child, repeat back to me what I said. And I've done that before. I used to teach high school. And when you're giving instructions, especially for homework or for assignments, you want to make sure the child understands exactly what it is so he won't do the wrong page, won't do the wrong worksheet. We don't want that child to invest the time doing the wrong thing. Well, the Father in heaven has the same approach. I don't want you to invest your time doing the wrong thing. So repeat back to me what I said. Parents do it with their children all the time. Okay, here's what I want you to do. Now repeat back to me what I just said. That's an important part of the teaching process. And it's not just so we can catch them later when they didn't do what we say. It's so we are sure they understood exactly what was expected of them. And it plants those seeds more deeply because verbally, when you answer someone, there's little bit different part of your brain that's activated. You're getting double. It's not just passive listening. Now it becomes active. I'm saying it back to you. Now I'm investing in the conversation. So they had the opportunity when they said the commandments back, when they affirmed them, they could experience the awesomeness of the yeses. And they could sense the terribleness of his no's because his presence is right there on the mountain. We need both. We have to affirm both of these, both the positives and the negatives, because it preserves our lives. It keeps us from running into oncoming traffic. It keeps us from burning our hands. It keeps us from pulling the dog's ears. And he's giving us the instructions for life, both in this world and the world to come. And that gives us an opportunity to be awesome, both in the yeses and terrible in the no's. What do I mean by that? You need to be totally awesome doing a positive commandment. And you need to have the mind of Messiah, of just how terrible the no's are. Imagine how Yeshua feels about stealing. Imagine how Yeshua feels about coveting. Imagine how Yeshua feels about these no's, and take on the fervor of that 2-year-old learning no. Attach the same fervor to the no's as somebody in their terrible 2s or 3s. So there's positive commandments. They're awesome, right? But what about the no's? Those can be just as important because, again, they're there to preserve your life. So be excited about the no commandments. Imagine if we were that enthusiastic about the no's as a 2-year-old, because number one, they don't understand them. They don't really get everything about, they just love the power of the word no. Okay, take that same power, that same thrill of saying no, and just attach it to that negative commandment. No, I won't steal. No, I won't covet. No, I won't swear falsely. Oh, no, I won't worship an idol. You see what a great training method that is? When we're going through the terrible 2s of the 10 Commandments, if we can take the power of yes and the power of no into obedience, then I think it really does build a foundation for receiving the remaining commandments. The training in the full 613 that Moses is going to come instruct them in when he returns. Now, it's a great idea. But what do we know about 2-year-olds? They need lots of reinforcement. You can't turn your back for a minute. They're going to draw all over your walls with permanent markers. A lot of bad things can happen, right? A lot of property damage can happen if you turn your back just for a minute. So we know there's lots of reteaching and remediation in the terrible 2s and the 3s and the 4s. But we're no different. Even as grown human beings, sometimes we don't remember the no's very well. Not this nose, the no's. Don't do that. And just like kids, we don't like to hear no. Now, it's fine if it applies to somebody else. If a no is being applied to someone else, then we want to make sure that they're observing that no. But when the no applies to us, we're not that enthusiastic about it. I've even heard parents say they don't like to discipline their children in church or in a congregation because they don't want them to hate going there. Now, they will complain about other people's kids, but sometimes parents, they don't want to say or enforce the no's on children. And I know when I taught high school, we always got the parent-teacher conferences, and what was that called? Open house or something, where the parents would come by. There weren't very many parents that would come by the time they get to high school. I don't know if they didn't care or just thought it was, past helping, but I always appreciated when the parents would come by. But often I would notice that, especially if the child was with them, they didn't act the same around their parents as they did in class. They might be very well behaved in the classroom, but then I would hear them being real smart alecky to their parents, which bothered me. Which I've always heard that kids act better away from their parents than they do with their parents, and we want to hope that's the case. But nevertheless, honor your father and mother. But in those conversations with parents, I would hear them say, well, I don't want to discipline my children excessively because I don't want to break their spirit. I don't want to make them hate school. You know what? It's got a tune and you can dance to it, but it's empty. Because what I was really hearing is they needed their teenagers to like them. And so they couldn't bring themselves to say the no's and enforce them. Somehow their own self-esteem was more valuable than that child. And they're still children at teenager. I know they think they know everything in the world. They're still children. Their brains are still developing. Their ability to predict consequences is still developing. And somehow that parent's self-esteem, I want my child to like me, was more important than teaching that child to respect the boundaries in these smaller things so that later they would respect them in the bigger things as adults. Because see, when a teacher sends you to the principal's office, there's a consequence for that. But maybe if a policeman pulls you over on the side of the road for speeding, if he suspects, that there's some sort of impairment, how you react to that policeman might be a much different thing than the way the principal might talk to a 15-year-old. So if they can learn to respect the principal and the teacher at 15, it might save their lives at 21. It's little by little, we train them. And there's really no danger you're going to break their spirit. Okay, we're not talking about wild horses here, right? What's happening is you're training the soul. Without the spirit, the child would be dead anyway. It's the spirit of Elohim in them. So if we're talking about the Holy Spirit, you can't break that. And the child is alive. What you're talking about is the soul of the child. There is no such thing as a free spirit, but there is such a thing as a free soul that has been undisciplined. Yeshua came to save our souls because our souls are rowdy. It's our life force. It's called the nefesh in Hebrew. And remember, it consists of I think, I feel, I want. I think, I feel, I want. If you discipline, I think, I feel, I want, it is not going to break your spirit. It's not going to kill you. You're only going to feel like you're being killed. But that's just the soul masquerading as the spirit. It always does. But the Holy Scripture, and we know that the Torah is spiritual. That's what Paul wrote to the Romans. The Spirit can train the soul. So the Scripture, the words, the commandments train the thinking, feeling, and the wanting of human beings, whether they're in their terrible twos or their terrible 70s. We're born in need of nurturing. We're born in need of training. The soul needs to be trained. It needs to be disciplined. And sometimes the training's uncomfortable. When the training is uncomfortable, the soul will tell us, you're dying. And what does the proverb say? You're not going to kill your son if you discipline him. He's only going to feel like he's dying. But that's just that very painful process of the spirit of the child being allowed to come into alignment with the word. It's not an easy process sometimes. What do we know? The most famous line, a verse, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. The most loving thing that Adonai did for us required for him to endure hearing his son Yeshua plead, please, please let this cup pass from me. This is going to hurt. Daddy, this is going to hurt. Imagine the Father hearing his only begotten son cry in desperation on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Wow. His perfect son. You don't think that caused pain to his Father? Hearing him cry out to his Father, the pain of a father in that situation is unimaginable. And his human mother, Miriam, she's standing right there watching this. She had to bring up Yeshua knowing he would suffer torture and death. What love of the Father and the mother toward the Son. And they weren't afraid he wouldn't enjoy being the Messiah in the millennium if he endured our tribulation on the cross. Yeshua endured the discipline on our behalf on this earth. The pain of our souls was laid on him. And he doesn't hate us. He loves us. He doesn't hate churches and synagogues. He loves us. Look how much he loved us. Look how much the Father loved us. He put his son through that because of love. Sparing a child discomfort is no demonstration of love. It can be, but that's not how you quantify that. Remember, love, it's slippery. What does it mean? How do you measure it? Sometimes love requires us to discipline children in the same way that love required the Father to discipline Yeshua on our behalf. That had to have been painful. And so, yes, all of us have trouble remembering to do our yeses and our nos. We forget our training sometimes. And as we watch, especially the younger children beginning to internalize some of the easier commandments, even some of the more difficult ones that grown-ups have trouble with. I've seen children defend kosher eating with way more tenacity and vigor than I've ever heard grown-ups. Children, they can awe us. It can be awesome when they embrace a commandment, when they embrace the word. And you know what? It can feel pretty terrible when they forget, when they disappoint us. It's part of the growth. It's just part of the process we go through. It's the same process the Father goes through with us. And you know what? In spite of their failures, Adonai guided Israel through their terrible and awesome twos. He led them through the tweens. He led them through the teens. He led them 40 years until they were ready to cross the Jordan River. The same way, our children, they're going to need correction between today and the promised land. This is something you can write down. I don't know if anybody's ever said it before. If they have, I think it was a great statement, but it's just something that came to me yesterday. So this is something to write down. Children do not hate because they are disciplined. They hate the discipline. Children do not hate because they are disciplined. They hate the discipline. And we hate discipline. We do too. We are the children of Israel, and we don't like discipline. So We train children to affirm the no's. Sometimes we train them school behavior. We train them congregational behavior. We train them grocery store behavior. We train them family event behavior. And as we train them, as we discipline them to accept the no's with the same enthusiasm as the yeses, sometimes a parent is going to hear some pitiful cries, or even some angry ones. You're going to hear things like, I hate you, or you hate me. And every parent hates that. But see, the grown-up has to be the translator. The child does not mean I hate you. And in many cases, they're too young to even know what hate is. I mean, just the same way that they're not born knowing what love is. They're not born knowing what hate is. What they're saying is, I feel bad because you're making me behave in a certain way that is not natural or comfortable for my soul. Or they're saying, I just lost my challenge to your authority and I'm angry. That's all it means. It doesn't mean they hate you. But see, our self-esteem, our ego, our need to feel good about ourselves should not weigh more heavily. We have to stand up and be the translator and say, the child does not hate me. They're just, the soul is being made uncomfortable right now. That's all it means. That child does not hate you. And that child is not going to hate going to the places where he or she is disciplined. Unless the child is kind of resolved not to change the behavior in those places. Because, terrible twos Tommy, he's probably not going to refuse going to the grocery store next time. Even if you did take him to the car early for snatching things off the shelves the last time, because hope springs eternal, right? There's always that possibility of scoring a box of Panda Puffs or Cheetah Chomps in the future. He's not going to develop a lifetime aversion to grocery stores if he's disciplined there a few times. So I don't think we need to hold up our congregational attendance as something of less value. Yes, the child will probably go to grocery stores the rest of his life. And hopefully the child will attend a believing congregation the rest of his life. And so are we investing more time teaching terrible twos Tommy right behavior in the grocery store or maybe the doctor's office than we are in our local congregation? Are we not even attending a congregation because we don't want to fight the battles with terrible twos Tommy and Tina? See, Yeshua's custom was to go to the congregation each Shabbat. Now, are there sick days? You bet. Are there things that can come up? You bet. But what is the custom? And I've seen so many parents lately just not even want to go to service because they don't want to fight. You know what? Don't be afraid to have those battles with your kids at the congregation. That's where they need to happen. Remember when Yeshua stayed behind in the temple to Midrash with the scholars? And his mother and father were looking for him, and Miriam finally finds him in the temple, sitting down, just kicking it with the scribes, and she scolds him. And the point is, it's not whether she was right or wrong to scold him. I'm sure as a mom, she was right. From his point of view, it's like, what's your problem? I'm about the Father's business. He thought, I'm doing the right thing here. But the point is, that scolding didn't scar him for life. He kept coming back at the feast with his family to worship. When he had his own disciples, he kept going back to the temple to worship. Maybe his mom didn't understand why Yeshua needed to stay in the temple. But he wasn't resentful at his scolding. He loved his mother. He honored his mother. He loved her for trying to be a good mom and worrying about him. And one of the last things he did on the cross was to make sure she was going to be taken care of. And I think that's why it's important to tell our children even before they can understand it, because trust me, I've had the line before that, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And I'm like, I doubt it. Parents know of a different kind of hurt. From the child's point of view, this is hurting my backside, or this is cramping my style because you're not letting me do this or that, or have this or that. But if we'll go ahead and tell them anyway, it's probably been the same line for thousands of years. But tell them when we discipline them, we love them. Don't discipline when you're angry. Don't discipline because you're on a power trip. Wait until you're calm. And do the discipline then. Never discipline in anger. Because then it does become equated with a feeling. Remember, love is not always a feeling. Sometimes it's an action. We don't want to confuse the two. But what this discipline can do is drop a seed they will remember later, and they will look back and probably, like Yeshua, say, you know what? Mom was a little off base there. She needed to understand what I was about. She needed to know who I was and what I was doing. But Yeshua loved his mother. He understood that she did what she did because she loved him and she was worried about him. Tell your children, I'm disciplining you because I love you and I'm worried about you. And I'm worried that if you can't even come to a congregational service and participate in these smaller things, if you can't, a lot of people are homeschooling, but if you are in a public school or even a private school, I'm worried that you can't go to school and you can't get along with the other students or the teachers, that later this will be a real problem. Because if you can't accept instruction and correction from the people you have seen, how are you going to accept the no's, the big ones, the terrible no's of Scripture? How will you learn to discipline yourself? And see, discipline can be very creative, and it can fit the child's way of learning. My mom and dad had two different approaches. Mom's approach was a belt or a switch or whatever was at hand, fly swatter, coat hanger, you name it. If she could grab it, it was fair game. My dad talked to me. Which one was more effective? Talking to me. If you could help me understand it, I'd make a deal. And he finally got her to understand that. He was quite a bit older than she was. He was actually old enough to be my grandpa. So he had a lot more wisdom and experience. And he knew you have to look at the individual child and say, what makes them tick? You find out what makes that child tick. I said, train up a child in the way he should go. Find out what the personality is. Find out what they respond to. Find out where their sense of justice is. And appeal to that. Sometimes because I said so has to suffice. But it's not the answer to every why. They need to learn that, nope, so they won't run into the street. Nope, so the dog won't bite them. But as they get older, remember, now they can understand some of the whys. Explain the whys. And start explaining even before you think they can process it. They'll surprise you. I remember there was an age I reached, we didn't have a lot of anything like kids' church or anything like that growing up. I had to sit there and listen to the preacher preach. And Mom would say, I know you don't understand much of what he's saying, but you're going to sit there and be respectful. And as it turned out, I understood way more than she thought I did. Because just sitting there, there's nothing else to do. There's nothing else to distract you. All you can do is sit there and listen. And when there's nothing else you can do, it actually improves what you can listen to and understand. You start to absorb that language of the words. And so she didn't realize it, but she was planting seeds even before She thought she was. She just thought it was a matter of like self-discipline. You can sit here for 30 minutes, or you can sit here for 45 minutes and act like you're somebody. You're not going to squirm in the seat. You're not going to turn around. You're not going to draw. You're not going to, which, you know, a lot of that's age appropriate. But at a certain age, she says, this is what you're going to do. And I appreciate that now. I didn't then. I thought I was dying then. To sit still for 30 or 45 minutes without drawing. Wow. But I appreciate it now. Because the things she taught me, the discipline she taught me back then, it might seem to have not one thing to do with a commandment, to just like child behavior. But in the end, it did have something to do with the commandment. It taught me to honor her, taught me how to listen. We will do and we will hear. I learned to hear her. I learned to obey her. And then, because there wasn't anything else to do, I learned to hear the word as the preacher preached it. Double barrel. Sometimes it's because I said so, because the child is not ready to hear why. They can't process why. Explain if you can. There's certain commandments that Adonai is going to give us that have no rational explanation of why. Some of them are perfectly logical. We know why you shouldn't steal, because somebody's going to smack you upside the head. Some things like kosher eating, where's the logic in it? And I've heard people do crazy acrobatics trying to figure out why it was okay to not eat kosher now. Like, well, back then they didn't have refrigerators. No, it's just because he said so. And in time, he'll explain why. In time. We're going to accept both of them. We're going to accept the I said so's, and we're going to accept the ones that we just, man, it's awesome how we can get down in there and understand the value of that word, the awesomeness of the yes. But until we understand the no's, thunder the no's. No, I will not. And if somebody says, why? I'm like, because he said so. I don't really understand yet. But you know what will happen? He'll start to explain it to you. And if your heart is tender and he begins to explain it to you, you're like, oh, wow, that's why we can't do that. This is such a great opportunity to teach faith to kids about the same process we go through with the Father. Say, you know, kids, sometimes I understand the commandment and why we need to do it or not do it. Sometimes I don't. There's going to be certain things I tell you you're not going to understand until you attain a certain age. Maybe when you're married. Maybe when you have children of your own. But trust me, I'm always here for your good. Whether I'm giving you a yes or a no, they're for your good. The same way the Father, he gives us a yes or a no for our good, whether we understand it or not. And if you'll notice, or maybe you probably have noticed this, like for instance, in Leviticus 23:22, the Father knows how we are. And so he'll word certain commandments as both a positive and a negative. He knows that on different days, we don't want to be told what to do. And he knows other personality types. We're just like, could you just tell me specifically what to do? If you'll just tell me what to do, I'll do it. Some people need that heavier, like, don't do that, right? So in that particular commandment, it's a great example to show people. It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, moreover, you shall not. There's a not, don't do it. Reap to the very corners of your field, nor gather the gleaning of your harvest. That's a don't. And then he says, you are to leave them for the needy and the alien. I am the Lord your God. So he worded it as a negative. No, don't do that. And then he worded it as a positive. Do this. Leave it for the needy and the alien. Some personality types, that's all they have to hear. Leave it for the needy and the alien. I want to do that. Yes. Other people, like, seriously, I have to leave all that for them? Yeah. Don't reap that. Okay. However you need to hear it, he says, here it is. Whether you need to hear it as a positive or a negative, and something you can do for yourself. If you read a commandment and you don't like it, if it's a no, try turning it into a yes. Just flip it around like he does. If there's something like, you shall not covet. Well, Paul comes along later and he says, you shall covet the better gifts. What am I permitted to covet? Well, not my neighbor's possessions, the things that are apportioned to him by the Holy One. But what are some things, like I might see a gift in operation and I don't want their gift that they're operating in, like it's theirs, but that same gift, I could covet it to operate in me the way that he would like. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. I would just like to see that gift in operation in my life without taking anything away from me. I can do that. I can pray for that in a positive way. Teaching kids how to do that, I think it can be valuable, because at this point, we've got a generation and they're in a crisis of not being able to say no. And if you can't say no to certain things, if everything is okay with you, then how are you going to embrace the no's of half your life? I mean, half of your life is going to be the no's, the things you can't do. Probably more than half, if you look at the commandments. Over half of life is what you can't do, what you shouldn't do. And if you have that little bit of rebel, sometimes we get a little bit of rebel in it. We don't like people telling us no. I'm a grown-up now. I don't have to listen to no anymore. Oh, yes, you do. You can either listen now or you can listen for eternity, but you will listen. We need to begin embracing the no's, because they're a prescription for a good life. If you can't embrace the no's, you're going to miss half your life, because there's goodness in the no's. And especially, whether we're talking about terrible twos or terrible 20s, they do need to be a matter of discipline until they're internalized, until the heart can grab them. Love Adonai and love people. If you understand that no matter what the commandment is that you're having trouble with, there's something in that commandment that expresses love for Adonai and love for people, it can begin to change your heart. Because if the pressure here is only external, it's not going to last when you have a choice to do something different. If you can do otherwise, you'll quit doing it, or you'll start doing something you shouldn't be doing. But the word, the commandments, remember, Paul says they're a tutor until you attain an age of maturity, and that commandment, until the place where nobody has to discipline you into doing them or not doing them, when all of a sudden your heart catches a hold. It's kind of like those old-fashioned can openers. I don't know if you guys remember these. Probably everybody has electric can openers now, but those old ones, you'd put the can opener down on the can and you'd start turning and turning, and you could turn for a while before it would catch. But you knew once it caught, you would feel it just kind of like the resistance actually, it was harder to turn once it actually caught. Sometimes we have to keep applying that force there, the pressure of training and discipline, until all of a sudden the heart gives in and says, oh, it's about loving Adonai. Oh, kosher eating, that's about loving Adonai. And somehow, in a way I don't understand yet, it's about loving other people. Maybe he's doing something with me on the inside that will make me a better person as I deal with his sheep. We need to let that word, let those commandments be the tutor until those yeses and nos arise from the heart. Love Adonai, love his people. Because if the love is lacking, there's not going to be much stomach for enduring the discipline that goes along with it. Yeshua could endure what he endured because his love was not lacking. His love for the Father was not lacking. and his love for people was not lacking. So he hung in there. If it's not coming from the heart, once we have a choice, we're just going to see the no's as something deny us the food, the fun, the power, the feelings we think we deserve. We can end up in the terrible 20s, the terrible 60s, the terrible 70s, still define them. And you know what? No one can really predict who will or won't embrace the yeses and the nos of the word from the heart, or even when they might. But like Paul said to the Romans, everybody can be trained in them until they do embrace them. Half of life is no, at least half. But we can have that. What would the word be? Throw a word out there in the chat box. Vigor, enthusiasm. What would the word be? When we encounter even a no commandment. When we encounter that, can we respond with enthusiasm? When we read something we're not supposed to do, yeah, enjoy it. Thanks, Jeannie. Enjoy it. It's just is one of those things. There's things we just don't like. And, you know, very often, even foods, there's certain foods where, like, if I don't like a certain food, I'm not ever going to like it. Well, you know, I like foods today I didn't like when I was 5. And I ate foods when I was 5 I wouldn't touch today unless I was starving. We can change. We can be transformed. And if we can look at those no commandments and embrace them. No, I won't do that. Have that conversation with the Father. Just saying it back to him, is that going to make it happen? Not if we look at the example of the Israelites in the wilderness. It didn't just instantly make them immune to worshiping idols. It didn't instantly make them immune to complaining. It didn't make them instantly immune to much. But it planted the seed because they could say with enthusiasm, yes, we will. No, we won't. Get kids started doing that when you're teaching them the commandments. Yes, I will honor my parents. I mean, it's okay if it turns into a cheerleading session. It's okay if it gets rowdy and loud. Let it get rowdy and loud. Yes, I will love my neighbor as myself. Yes, I will. No, I will not mistreat the stranger just because they're different. You can use your own, you can let them put it in their own words. They don't have to be thou shalts. Nothing worse than King James, right? In terms of language. At least go New King James with them. Give them a chance here. Let them put the commandments in their own word, and with each one, start it with a yes or a no. Because either way, it's an affirmation. You realize that. Whether you say yes or no, yes, I will, or no, I won't, it's still an affirmation. It's only a negative when you say, no, I won't obey. But you can say, no, I will not steal. No, I will not murder. It's important to have the conversation, get them started having the conversation. You realize that's, if you look at that section of scripture, how much real estate is given to even the preparation. Have you ever noticed, like, let's just get to the 10 Commandments. How much real estate goes into how much preparation, the experience, what they felt, what they saw. I mean, the physical description there is astounding. What they experienced, the trembling and the so forth, and the heavens dripping water and the fire and the smoke. And then at this step, they did this. And then at this step, they just, Well, that's not just taking up room. It's telling you this is an important thing to remember. That when you have a conversation with Elohim, it can turn pretty dramatic. Maybe it won't. On most days, I don't think we have that same experience. But you know what? We can approach it with the same enthusiasm as they did on that particular Shavuot. They thought they were ready to have the conversation, but they weren't quite prepared. You know what? When we start having conversations with Elohim, it might manifest itself differently than our normal prayers. We typically ask him for the things we want. But when we stand there and wait for him to tell us what he wants, and then we affirm every word, yes, I will, or no, I won't. That's a conversation worth having. That's a conversation that's going to plant seeds of change. May not change you tomorrow. May not change you before Moses gets down from the mountain, but eventually, if your heart is right, it will change you. And that's, if we're going through that process, then we can always look at children as an example. You know, like Yeshua said, allow the little kids to come to me. This is the kingdom of heaven right here. If you want to learn about the kingdom of heaven, look at these kids, because these kids are you. These are you in your terrible twos. These are you in your rebellious teenage years when you think you know everything. Learn from them. And grasp the best part of each stage. Like we said, these little kids, they can be awesome with the commandments in ways we never thought of, and they'll just blow you away with what they'll come out of their mouths. Give them an opportunity, not just to experience the awesomeness of the word, but give them, if you have a congregation, it's healthy. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it shouldn't be perfect. I'd be really suspicious if it was. But just put them there where there's going to be people who challenge them, who rub them the wrong way. Because the word's all good until we have to do it. We will do and we will hear. We can hear it and say, I'm going to obey it. But then once we have to do it, it's always with the pressure. The conditions won't be the ideal situation we had envisioned. But these are the little disciplines of the soul. It's not going to break their spirit. You know, discipline that's properly applied is a big deal in the book of Proverbs. Know the child. Know what's most effective. But it's not wrong to say, no, our Father does not withhold the nose from us. We can't withhold the nose from our children. Are they going to sulk like we do? Yeah. Yeah. But can we be an example of embracing the nose? I think we can. I think we can do that. So that's it. That's pretty much the gist of the notes that I wrote down. And I don't know if that was just for me. Sometimes it is. Sometimes things are just for me. They're not really to teach anybody else. But it was so strong. I felt like this was what he had for you guys today. And maybe it's somebody you're trying to counsel. Maybe you have children and they're having trouble with your grandkids. There's all sorts of situations. You might have coworkers who are having trouble with their kids. The same principles we're learning that apply to the kingdom, it starts with children and those same principles and seeing how we discipline children. We don't want them to grow up and throw off every yoke of authority. Because if you ignore the nose, there's death. Remember, the Torah is a tree of life. There is even life in the nose. There's life in the nose, not this nose. the negative notes. And our children need a chance. And sometimes it's just, hey, maybe we never slowed down and explained the importance of no. And explained that, yeah, it's going to feel bad. Don't be surprised when it feels bad. When there's discipline. That shouldn't be a surprise to you. But on the other side of it, my prayer for you is that you'll understand that the Father in heaven will be able to reveal to you the life in the no's, even beyond my teaching you, no, you can't go out with friends that are on drugs. No, you can't go out on unsupervised dates. No, you may not. As long as you're in this house. No, you won't. I'm going to protect you, my little girl. I'm going to protect you, my young man. I'm going to be the grown-up until you're the grown-up. I'm here to tutor you until you internalize it. No, there is no such thing as privacy on your computer. There's no such thing as privacy in your room. Unless, the normal proprieties, but we're talking about, do you as a parent have the privilege of going in and searching a child's room to make sure that there's no drugs, that there's no alcohol? Do you have the privilege of checking their laptop? Making sure there's no pornography on there, making sure they're not accessing harmful things that they can never unsee? Of course you do. You don't just have the privilege, you have the responsibility to do that. Trust me, the Father's looking into our business. And you have that, not just right, you have that obligation to keep those kids safe with no's sometimes. The no's will save their lives just as much as the yeses. Because I love you, I want to make sure there's nothing harmful on your iPhone. Because I love you, no, you can't go do things with that little friend. And it's okay. Will they say, I hate you? You don't love me? Of course they will. We said it, didn't we? We may not have said it out loud because there was the belt thing back then. It's okay if they say they hate you. They will. Just get ready. Because here's the thing to remember. When kids say hurtful things to you, there's 4 kinds of responses they can have. And we're not going to have, child psychology class today. But just understand, because the hurt language sometimes hits deep. When kids say things like, I hate you, you've had some failing in the past that they know about, that they'll bring up some failing that you've had, something that they know will cause an emotional hurt to you when they say it. Typically what has just happened or has recently happened is they lost a power struggle. When they lose a power struggle, one of the signs that they lost it is that they'll use the only weapon left at their disposal, and that's hurtful words to make you feel bad. That's all that they've got left. And what do? You know what? It's okay to feel bad. We all do. That's life. Until we die or Yeshua comes back, we're going to have times when we feel bad because we didn't get what we wanted. How many prayers do we pray and we didn't get what we wanted? It's okay to feel bad. But it's not okay to use hurtful words. Words are powerful. And so we have to, first of all, be careful that we're not doing that too. That when we lose a power struggle with somebody, that we're not using offensive language to talk about them or hurtful language or calling names and those sorts of things. Because so many times kids, they're predictable. They're going to mirror you. And if you've made a mistake, you just have to own up to it. And say, this is what life is, making mistakes, repenting of them, and committing to do better. Mom has to do it. Dad has to do it. You have to do it. So I hope that was an encouragement to someone today. Hope so. So I am back on track. Feel good over the infection, over COVID again. So really at this point, I just kind of need you to continue praying that my immune system would be healed. That's the big thing right now. My immune system has is like the prodigal son. It's gone to a far country. And I have become very hospitable, is what I understand. Yes, do I use every vitamin and supplement in the protocol? I do. All it took was one trip to the pharmacy to pick up medication, and that's where I got it. It's the only place I went all week. So that's what I need. You can do everything right, and apparently still some people are very friendly. We have receptors for viruses, and we're in the hospitality business, and I don't want to be in the hospitality business for viruses. So please just leave that on your prayer list if you have an ongoing one. And I know that you probably know lots of people right now who are having the same difficulty, because there's just such a proliferation at this point of viruses and things going around. But I really would like to feel strong again. And sometimes it feels like I'm letting people down when I don't feel well. I know I am. I'm letting them down when I don't feel well, but that's not really under our control. So when something is under our control, we're going to go 90 miles an hour. Well, not over the speed limit, right? Yeses and nos. We'll go hard as we can when we feel well. And when we don't, I'm going to give myself permission from now on just to take a break and heal up. And I know you guys will understand. Not everybody understands, but I know you guys do, because you're with me each week. And so I thank you for that. So I'll let you go about your business now. A little bit of Shabbat left here, not much. But it's been a beautiful Shabbat today. And I pray that you'll all just have a wonderful, wonderful week next week. And I look forward to seeing the students Monday night, Tuesday afternoon, and getting right back on track there, right? Thanks, Missy. Put your own oxygen mask on first. That was really a thing last week, wasn't it? Something to remember for air travel next time you fly somewhere. All right, so I'll say goodbye. I love you, and B'ezrat Hashem, I'll see you back here again